This week's Just You Award goes to Marcus Spar with Between the Covers podcast. Marcus's passion is helping break others free from pornography, unwanted sexual behavior, and the negative mindsets that limit us from being our best selves. When Marcus talks, he talks to just you. You won't hear him say, "You guys," or "Hey, you guys," or "Hey, everybody." His conversation is one-on-one, and it makes you lean in and listen. Congratulations, Marcus. Check out his podcast, Between the Covers, with Marcus Spar, S-P-A-U-R, on any platform that you get your podcasts. If you have been thinking or saying, "I want to do a podcast," but then immediately you think, "I'm not techie. I hate my voice. Who would listen? What would I say?" If you are a woman over 40, you have things to say. And with my course, the Podpreneur Blueprint, you can get a podcast up and running within a week if you'd like. If you're not techie, don't worry. I give you options of how to find someone that can help you. We are not islands. We don't do this alone. If not now, when? Because on New Year's, when you make that new resolution, this year, I'm going to think about this. You could be saying, "This year I did, and I have 52 episodes." You can do this. Learn all about podcasting with the Podpreneur Blueprint System. Go to www.coachlaurie.com and get your flash sale today. Somebody's praying for an answer, and you have it. Will you say yes? Go to www.coachlaurie.com. That's Laurie.
We also have a program where people living with dementia can participate called Dementia in the Arts. This is where we are now, instead of doing a panel, when we did a pilot, we had a panel of people showcasing their art. Now we're going to dive deep with one person, showcase their art. And it's incredible. It's a stigma buster.
Has your life, your dreams been interrupted? Good news. It is possible to reinvent our lives. People are doing it every day, and some are brave enough to share the struggles, disappointments, and challenges. If you are looking for a new beginning, a do-over, or to rediscover your passion, maybe even find a new one, then grab a cup of coffee and let's talk. Interrupted, Act 2, Reinventing Your Legacy, with your host, Coach Laurie.
Laurie LeBay's podcast is Alzheimer's Speaks. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Laurie. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. How long have you been doing this podcast?
Since 2011. Initially, when I started, I went on Blog Talk Radio, and so I called it Alzheimer Speaks Radio because no one was really using the phrase, even though it had been around a lot longer. And so, I just kind of pulled that off my name recently and go by Alzheimer Speaks now.
That's a long time. Good for you.
I started because I was a frustrated daughter and I wanted to raise all voices at all levels all around the world because that wasn't being done. So I've been told it was the first of its kind in the world dedicated to dementia and caregiving.
And caregiving, even if they're not at Alzheimer's yet, boy, caregivers are so invisible.
Oh, they really are. And there's so much overlap. I mean, I don't care if you're caring for your dog or your child or your spouse or a chronic illness or yourself. There's just so many things that overlap. One of the most difficult things is we aren't good in society of giving people permission to talk about their feelings or to support them in a healthy fashion because we're so uncomfortable when the caregiving turns what I call from crisis. When we sign up to be a parent, okay, we've signed up. Typically, we're excited about that and we're viewed as a caregiver. But caregiving in other stages of life is kind of this taboo topic, even though you wouldn't think it is, but it really isn't an open conversation where people feel comfortable to be their authentic selves and state how they truly feel.
That's so good. So you started yours on Blog Talk Radio, and then did you just, as things evolved, did you just keep moving on to different platforms?
Yeah, I was with Blog Talk for a long time, and then a local company, Alive and Social, approached me. And so I started going into their studio and transferred everything over there. And they never really got off the ground to where they wanted to be. So then that ended and I went back to Blog Talk. And then the last year or so, I have been with Senior Resources, which is with a friend of ours, Suzanne Perkins, who has her own show, which is nationally syndicated. That's where I am currently. But the podcast, the general public could care less where you are because they can access Apple and Spotify and all these other places. People just want easy access to your show is what I found.
Except for when you've had breaks because you've had to switch. Have you been pretty consistent on weekly, or how often do you drop one?
Yeah, I started doing one a week and I had to learn all the technology and all of that kind of stuff. Now I do 2 to 3 a week.
Oh, wow.
And they're an hour long. And a lot of people have said, they need to be shorter. No one has an attention span. But what I learned early on, I had a friend who worked for iHeartRadio. They said, I'm going to pull you in to talk with their peeps. When they pulled me in, I was a little embarrassed because they said, well, how many people listen to a show? And at that time, stats showed 2,000 to 4,000. And I was like, I apologize. It wasn't iHeart. It was Clear Channel. When I talked with them and I said that number, I was embarrassed because I thought, what's a couple thousand people when you're talking to Clear Channel? That's this massive, massive company. They said, oh, Laurie, you're so wrong. This is a huge number that people are turning into your show. And I said, well, how can that be? And they said, because they're actually tuning in to listen. Ended up not going with them because of the cost factor was so high. Then I would have to cut my show time in half and then give 10 minutes over to advertising. And I really wanted a show that allowed us to have a full conversation, to go a little bit deeper into why are people doing what they're doing and how can it help and all those other little things. And we just do it in a very informal fashion where it's just like two people talking.
I love that. Do you do your own editing?
Yep. I've learned to do that. I also learned early on that my audience in particular, when I started, everything in the industry was very formal, very structured, had to be really flashy. My audience said over and over, because every now and then on Blog Talk, we'd have somebody would get cut off and they'd have to call back in. But in this day and age of technology, everybody's used to that with their cell phones. And they're like, that's the least of our worries. We know how to reconnect and we'll just hop back in. What I found for me and my audience, which is anyone who is dealing with dementia at any level, so from professionals to people living with the disease and families, is they want an authentic conversation. They don't want a sales pitch. Real life, when you're authentic, stuff happens. It's not perfect. And that's the world we live in. So why not be honest with it? And so that's the approach I've just taken throughout doing my shows, is I'm not going to worry about having a staged professional product. I want something that's engaging and heartfelt, and my guests talk from the heart and their experience.
I love that. What kind of doors has it opened up for you being on a podcast?
Well, it's been interesting. I was recognized by Maria Shriver as an architect of change. And so she did a beautiful article with me and she invited me to be a speaker on one of her panels. I was recognized by Oprah as a health hero. Everything I do is pretty consistent. I push out a lot of content. I was recognized by AARP of Minnesota as basically a disruptor and creator of change. So things like that have come because people are like, oh my gosh, how did that happen? And it's like, I'm just out there. So if you Google Alzheimer Speaks or you Google Laurie LeBay, you're going to get bombarded with a lot of content, which, my focus is how to help people shift dementia care from crisis to comfort. So I really focus on, again, raising everyone's voice because I don't think we can make sustainable change without being inclusive. And I want people to have tips and tricks to live graciously alongside this disease. We don't have a cure. We probably won't in my lifetime, no matter what the promises are that are being made out there right now. It's like heart disease and cancer and diabetes and everything else. We just need to learn how to live with it, because we can't control getting rid of it, but we can still have a great quality of life.
That's so beautiful and so necessary. I think especially with Alzheimer's, there seems to be such a disconnect from the family because they just want them to remember. For lack of better, babysat a man with Alzheimer's. His wife was a bus driver, and I was home in the morning with my kids. So we'd go pick him up, and he'd just ride to school with me and my kids. And he would see a house and he'd say, "Remember when we lived there?" And we'd all go, "Yeah." And we'd have so much fun. And when she would get home, she would be like, "He's so happy." And then I would hear her correcting him, and I'd say, "Just go along with him."
Well, and that works for so many, but it's a whole shift. We have been, in my opinion, sold a bag of goods to be fearful of this disease, which nobody wants a chronic illness. I mean, come on. But when it is fear-based and it is leveraged for donations, and that's really how a lot of our major organizations have been focused. If we scare you, you'll help us find the cure. Well, my mom lived with dementia for 30 years. She's been gone since, 10 years now. We still don't have a cure, but they say, in 5 years, in 5 years, in 5 years. We're seeing all this pushing. There's nothing wrong with pharma. I would love a cure too, but pharma is not the only option. And what I learned during my experience and through talking with people all around the world on this is there are a lot of social engagement programs that can really, really help people. They can help the person providing care, if it's a professional or a family member, and they can really enhance the life of the person living with dementia, doing things like you said, live in their world. Doesn't make any difference if it's the story is right or wrong. You can create wonderful memories, have a good time, just move on. For me, I had to learn to focus on, instead of following my to-do list and being really task oriented, I had to focus on, was my mom safe, happy, and pain-free? And when I focused on those things, then I did everything different. And it enhanced her life and it enhanced mine. And we got back to being in relationships. So that's kind of the stuff I like to be able to bring about on the show. Simple, easy things that you can implement today. You don't have to read a huge book. You don't have to get certified. You don't have to do any of that. Just take a couple of tips and apply those to your life. The other thing that's been interesting in this conversation on the podcast is I haven't found one thing that someone has said regarding dementia that isn't good and applicable to all of your life.
Well, that's really interesting.
For example, is communication. His wife, for the example you gave, was focusing on the words and the right or the wrong. But you guys were reading his body language and what made him happy. We have to get back to that. And they're reading our body language, even though a lot of people think they're not capable. But sometimes people are very in tuned to, let's say, our moods. And so if I walk in the room frustrated, they could be perfectly content, but they're going to mirror back my frustration. I'm going to blame them when they were fine before I came on board. It's a really cool life lessons in terms of how we communicate and what is really important. And the people with dementia have taught me a ton through this process. Even, for example, another example would be in communicating. They say now that their brains can't process everything. So please look at me when you talk to me, because I need to read your facial expressions. And they all say, I didn't know I was reading lips before, because we take everything for granted when we're clicking on all cylinders. Having a podcast and being able to have these conversations, I mean, they enhance the host life, definitely. They help the person who's talking to get their word out, but the expanse of the reach is unbelievable. Most of them are free.
We're talking with Laurie LeBay. Her podcast is called Alzheimer's Speaks. And thank you for saying yes, because often people have a message, but they get caught up in the fear of technology or the how-to. And you said yes, and you put yourself out there. And what I love is that it sounds like you really learned as you went.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'll never forget. I had 2 offices in my house, and one was kind of my recording area. And I was doing an interview, and it was a panel, and all of a sudden everything went kerplunk. I still maintained it because I got on the phone and I kept the conversation going. And I remember carrying one of my laptops into the other room as I'm talking, and I'm trying to stay calm, and nobody knew, but inside my heart was just thumping, going, holy crap. But I listened to it and it was fine. You can only control so much. You do the best you can. And if you have a hiccup, you have a hiccup. That's life. And I mean, I've had it a couple of times where it hasn't recorded. And so that's been really bizarre. And I was like, dang, it was such a good show. But the second show was even better. When we re-recorded it, I've learned to let go of things that I can't control. And I think it's good to learn new things and new ways of doing things. I think it keeps our brain active, and people joke like that I'm high tech, and I'm like, to a point. Well, to a point, might know more than you, but there's a lot of people that know more than me. And that's okay. I'm okay with that.
Because you have put out so much content, you have so much for your listeners to be able to help and support them. And I love that. I heard this the other day. I think it was John Maxwell said, consistency compounds.
Oh, definitely. People know you're out there. And when you're out there a long time, you become a trusted source because of that. And then you have more people talking about you because they're excited that they were invited to be a guest on the podcast. And it's a ripple effect where everyone is lifting everyone up. And I also do open mics once a month, where I invite the public. Anybody can call in. I do everything through Zoom now, and then I upload it. Many of my programs are on Zoom and then again on the podcast level, but some are just audio. But they can participate. Again, it's inviting them in if they are living with the disease, if they are caring for somebody, if they have a business, if they've written a book, have a YouTube channel, Facebook group, learn something in a support group, want to pose a question, maybe they're a researcher. Every voice is welcome because we learn from one another. And I think that is the best opportunity. The other thing I think a podcast does is that, and I hate to admit this because one of these days I think they're going to strike me down, but I'm kind of an anti-Google girl. I get really tired of the pay for play game. And a lot of people, I think, give up thinking I'll never be found. Well, you know what? You will never be found if you never start. That's the bottom line. And it might take you a little longer than if you had a big budget, but that doesn't mean you are any less valued. And there are people that want to connect, and you can reach out on Facebook and find your niche and let them know what you're doing. And they come on board pretty quickly if you're authentic, I think.
I love that. If somebody wants to find you, it is alzheimerspeaks.com. Is that right?
Yeah. And if they go there, they will find a bunch of free resources they can access. So I not only do the podcast, but I do a thing called Dementia Chats where I interview people living with dementia. They pick the topic. They talk about denial for themselves, their care partners. They talk about how doctors need to improve because they're not getting the support. They talk about the full moons and the time changes and how that affects them, or when there's construction in their house, or should I have a pet or shouldn't I? I mean, there's just tons and tons of stuff there. And then we also have a program where people living with dementia can participate called Dementia in the Arts. I work with Mary Crescenzo out in California on that. And both the Dementia Chats and the Dementia in the Arts are on the Zoom platform. And I've been thinking about trying to figure out how to incorporate those into my podcast. So I may do that in the future. But Dementia in the Arts is where we are now, instead of doing a panel, when we did a pilot, we had a panel of people showcasing their art. But now we're going to dive deep with one person to showcase their art. And it's incredible. It's a stigma buster. They can find tools. We've got a poetry section. I do speaking and training. There's all kinds of opportunities. And I've written a book also called Betty the Bald Chicken that's there about lessons in how to care, which is a simple children's book that just gets us to think, how do we treat other people and how do we support them? How do we support ourselves because we're not good at self-care? and how do we want others to treat us and care for us. And that's a conversation we don't have that needs to come out. All kinds of information. We're always open to doing different things. So if you've got an idea, just let us know. But it's fun. It's exciting. And it's exciting for me to learn. But it's so satisfying to hear from people how these conversations have helped them. And that's what really keeps me going.
Well, Laurie, it's been such a joy to talk to you. And I love your podcast. I love what you're doing. And I'm just like in awe that you put out more than one a week, because even though it is a lot of work, in a way, once you get that in the habit of it, it gets pretty routine and it doesn't take as long. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And this last year, I've gotten more formalized too, where before I would put it out, but I didn't have necessarily an end date of when it was going to post. Now it is 1 week from the day we record. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I drop new stuff. Every now and then something will happen and maybe I'm sick. I won't have recorded, but I have plenty of stuff I can replay. I think sometimes people forget about all the content that they've created. Not everyone heard it the first time, so it's okay to play it again. Anyways, in my mind, it is.
That's such a good point, because even in radio, we have our blocks, our hours, and we'll say something like, say we're on 7 to midnight. So we say something in the 7 hour. We'll say the same thing in the 9 hour, because our listeners are rotating and changing. It's really important that people know they can redo content. For instance, on one of my podcasts called Enough, I talk about about every other month in just a different way, because it's an important topic. And so I love it that you brought that up.
Yeah, there's so many little tricks to make things easier. I mean, even like I have a standard template for every show, and then I just plug in their picture, their logo, and their title, change the dates. Boom, it's there. But I utilize Canva, and that makes it really, really simple to do. I have the opening music. You just drop that in ahead of time. And there's just all those little things that don't have to be a lot of work that you can just reuse, but it's getting into a pattern to learn those things. And you learn those things by trying.
Exactly. We know that if we keep learning things, it's going to help our mental health. It's going to help us in so many ways. So why not?
Exactly. Especially with dementia. That's, one of the key factors is to keep that mind active, learn new things. My mom started having symptoms with dementia at 55, and I'll be 65 in June. Probably still not kicking on all cylinders, but I'm still doing pretty good, because our brain changes after 21. We don't retain as much as we used to, which is kind of hard to believe, but our cell count changes.
Well, thank you so much. My big takeaway, two things. I love all the things you said about podcasting and consistency and basically just doing it. But I love what you said about that you interview people that are living with dementia and Alzheimer's, and the dignity and the value of letting them have a voice just really touched my heart.
But one of the things I would encourage people, because I know that there's a lot of people that have these expert shows and talk to the professionals, but I think it's really healthy to hear from the average Joe and let them speak about their problems as well. And so then you can help them resolve them. But to me, that just says you are really into what is going on and you're open to new ideas, because sometimes I think the experts get so caught up in being the expert that they lose touch. I just really appreciate this opportunity. It's been fun talking with you, and hopefully this has been helpful. If anyone has any questions, they are more than welcome to reach out to me. They can just get me at Laurie at Alzheimer Speaks, or go directly to the website. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our show. I guess I'll put that plug in there.
And it's LORI. And before we go, let's talk about that, because I just did an episode on my other Enough podcast about rate and review, because people are like, I hear them say, why are people always asking, do they need a pat on the back? And I'm like, no, it helps the podcast get seen and, so people can get the content they need. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
It's really important. And again, it's tough. For me, I approach this differently because I didn't know at the time when I started in 2011 how any of this stuff worked. I have like multiple social media accounts on Twitter and Facebook. So you can find me as Alzheimer Speaks. You can find me as Alzheimer Speaks Radio. Today, I would say that's a lot more work, but I also have other pages that I use that are different terms because somebody might view me in a different light. Like I have dementia chats. They don't know the difference, but everything's housed in one spot. But again, we are so controlled by algorithms. These reviews, these likes, these shares are important. At the end of every one of my podcasts, or I try to say it at every one of my podcasts, I ask people to be a giver of hope and to like, click, and share, not because I chase the numbers. I have never chased the numbers, but I ask them to be a giver of hope because there's somebody in their sphere of influence that needs this information, who might not even know that these types of things exist, where they can find resources, or it might not be the right time. But the more often they see it, the more comfortable the conversation and the resource becomes. Like I learned with dementia, the conversation, I mean, you couldn't even talk about it at all. One of my primary goals was to get this to be a comfortable conversation. And a conversation isn't had by me being a talking mouth and not having anyone else in the conversation. That takes at least two people. And I encourage people to have panels as well, because they can say good things about the work you're doing, which has more lift. And then you have more people sharing it. You expand your circle there. But understanding the value of a like, a review is really critical, and it does help significantly. And you can do that on Facebook, on Yelp, on the podcast itself. You can do it on Google, on the council. I mean, there's so many different places where you can comment, and it takes very little time and it costs you nothing to do. If you really like something, support it.
I love that. I tell people, whatever podcast you listen to, just take a minute at the end and go, if you love it, give it a 5-star rating, not a 3. Don't be critical. Either give it a 5-star or no star. But once you start doing it, it will become a habit, and it blesses the podcaster, and it helps more people, like you said, get hope and find. Now, when I Google Alzheimer's, yours is going to be the first one because people are liking and rating it. And then we're going to get the really good content that we need for our family. So it is so valuable. Thank you for speaking to that.
Laurie, you do interviews. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, and I get so many people that are so nervous, and usually within 5 minutes, I can get them calmed down. You're speaking from the heart. We're pre-recording it, so if you really screw up and feel uncomfortable, go, Lord, just cut that out, would you? It's not a big deal. And then they're all shocked how fast that hour goes, because they're like, oh, I don't have an hour's worth. And I'm like, yeah, you do. I'm not going to leave you high and dry. I'll be asking other questions, just like anybody else would. If it's a customer, if it's a family friend, that's called a conversation. You sparked interest, and that's what we want to do with all of this. I know what my question was now. It had to do with the numbers and bots, because I know so many people, they go after the numbers, but I look at, even on another show that I do, we get a higher response rate, but I also look at the comments, and I can tell a lot of them are just bogus. They're social media people, for whatever reason, engaging in the podcast, but they're not really my audience. You can tell by the questions and things. What are your thoughts on all of that? Because I know even just looking at back end stuff, numbers have changed dramatically over the years, clearing some of that stuff out. But I think it's really hard to tell. And yet so many people are so focused on the numbers. This probably hurts me in some ways, but even advertisers, I don't believe the numbers. I was told not to believe the numbers, by Clear Channel, actually. They're like, our numbers can be manipulated, Laurie. It all depends on how you want to look at them, but you're getting the response, you're getting the connections, you're getting the shares. Those things don't necessarily show up in the numbers. And yet they're really important. Back in, I'm trying to think, that it might have been 2011, 2013, I got recognized as the #1 influencer online for Alzheimer's by ShareCare, which is like the largest wellness community online. It was owned by Jeff from, he used to own WebMD and Dr. Oz. when they called me to announce that, and I'm like, well, how can that be? I know my Google numbers and they're not squat. I mean, in the scheme of things, they said, oh, Laurie, we go way beyond that. We look at the quality of your content. We look at the likes and the clicks and the shares, and we have never seen anything like your site. And they're like, how does your team do it? And I'm like, I have no team. I'm the team. And they couldn't believe it was just me. And they said, well, tell us how you're doing it. And I said, I'm just trying to have an authentic conversation. That's as simple as it gets. And I said, I don't get why my information is going further, because I'm up against the Alzheimer's Association, the Alzheimer's Foundation. These big, huge, massive companies. They said, Laurie, but their information isn't being shared. And I think it's because I'm still part of that community. I'm not up here. Mm-hmm. I want to engage with them. I want their voices to be heard. And so that was kind of shocking to me in terms of really value and spread. And then you get, of course, those comments. And a lot of them are private. Some people don't want to make a public comment. Just like I don't like to make a comment on someone's funeral anymore because I know they sell that list and I get bombarded with crap emails after I write a condolence message on them. So I don't do that anymore. How do you deal with that?
For me, like most of mine have been on the radio platform, so I don't have any management of any of that. They know they can come to my Facebook page, but a lot of times I don't see anything. And then one time someone will say something like, oh, we have a recovery group and every week we play your podcast, my little short one. And I'm like, how do I not know this? And then our radio station switched a platform after about 3 years. So all of the numbers set back to 0. Anytime I apply to be on a podcast now, they'll say how many downloads, how many reviews. Mm-hmm. If you don't have 50 reviews, forget it. Mm-hmm. Isn't that crazy? So for me, I'm just trying to really, this one's fairly new. It's just 6 months old, because I wanted to do it on my own and see how it all works. My 3rd episode, this gal had, this really strange disease. After it aired, she said, how come you didn't put the name of the disease in the title or description? Well, because I couldn't spell it and I couldn't pronounce it. So she goes, just go put it in. Well, I went and I, put it in the title. This is after, like 3 weeks after it aired. And we got almost 200 more downloads.
Wow.
So I think it's using keywords and I've used AI to help me sometimes with the title if I'm just baffled. I had hookers for Jesus. Well, you got to have a little more than that. So I said escaping sex trafficking. So trying to find those keywords. But this new one, now I'm telling people they must share. If I take the time to interview you, I want you to agree to share. But I interviewed so many people in the beginning and I would send them, like you said, the graphic. I create these amazing reels that they can put and they weren't sharing them at all. And I'm like, I don't understand. It just doesn't make sense to me. It feels like a slap in the face.
Trying something new. I'm asking people for suggestive titles, but I don't always use them. A lot of times it's Joe Blow's blah, blah, blah. And it's like, they don't care about Joe Blow, but they do care about blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And they'll get that later on, and not that you can't hashtag them. And then I ask everybody now for a list of all their social media.
Oh.
So in every podcast I do, I get a short bio from them that I list in there, and I put like, learn, this is what you're going to learn, just things. And then I put in all their contact information, their websites, because all those backlinks and stuff can help everybody.
Yeah, I do that. Yeah.
And then the social media stuff saves me time, because then I can go in ahead of time and like them and be connected. But a lot of them don't follow up on their social media stuff. And you do kind of have to think, oh, come on, what's the point of being on the show if you don't want people to hear you?
Yeah. Well, Laurie, thank you so much for being on the show.
I appreciate you having me on. Thank you, Laurie.
If you love this podcast, here's a big ask. Will you share with your friends and family, subscribe, give us a review, and a 5-star rating so that others looking to reinvent their lives will be able to get the help they're looking for? Thank you in advance.